Hello, I'm Erin Finnegan, your new host of the Los Altos History Show. I'm also the coordinator for the Los Altos History House Museum, located on the Civic Center property just behind the library off San Antonio Road. The museum is open on Wednesday and Saturday afternoons from 1 o'clock to 5 o'clock p.m. and we welcome you to visit us there. The History House Museum is located on a designated park area in the city of Los Altos, which brings us to the topic of our show this evening, the parks of Los Altos. Our introduction this evening included a collage of some of the park sites in Los Altos. Our guest, Roy Lave, is a former mayor and was on the city council when the community's thinking about public parks really began to change. Welcome, Roy.
Thank you, Erin.
Roy is CEO of Sistan Incorporated, a firm specializing in urban transit studies. Roy has taught at Stanford University in the Industrial Engineering Department and has been involved in public policy activities since the early 70s. He has served as commissioner on the Santa Clara County Transportation Commission, is president of Los Altos Tomorrow, a community foundation, served as president of the Los Altos Rotary Club, and has served as councilman and mayor of Los Altos.
Guilty of all that.
That's impressive. Now, we tend to take parks for granted here in our community now, but my understanding is that wasn't always the case here in Los Altos.
No, when I was in the council in the 70s, parks were pretty controversial items, and I think it stems from the fact that people generally think of Los Altos itself as being a park and couldn't understand the need for more parks. I remember on the council, people would come to us and argue against park bonds because they said every citizen has a park in their backyard. You see, if you look at the characteristic of Los Altos, if you ask a citizen, say in the 50s, to describe Los Altos, they would say, it's a low-tax city, we have quarter-acre lots, and we have a rural atmosphere. And in a sense, we're a park, and we don't want to pay anything for real parks. And that was the attitude that prevailed.
That's interesting, and I think we're fortunate that you as a council person sort of won people over to having parks, or we wouldn't have the things we take so for granted.
Well, I think the attitudes began to change. I think people began to realize that parks serve a role that you can't serve in any other way. There's, of course, the visual respite of the open space. Parks provide a place for people to socialize, either as individuals, as families, or even in large group settings like the Old Town Band that we have in Shout Park. So people began to understand that there was a real need in the social fabric of the city for parks. And this was helped somewhat by the fact that in '74, the general plan laid out a pretty ambitious plan for adding to park space.
Now, up until then, I understand that we did have a community park starting back as early as the community itself with the Shalps in the early 1900s.
Well, Shalps, of course, Paul Shalp gave us quite a legacy by having founded the town by developing it as a property development around the Southern Pacific Station. But his estate also donated the 2 acres for Shalp Park, which I assume was part of his property originally.
And when was that deeded to the city?
That was deeded in '52, which was the same year the city was incorporated.
Oh, okay. And how did the city propose to pay for that park once it became their property?
Well, I think that probably was a dilemma, but since it was free, they couldn't very well turn it down. And in fact, for 10 years or more, they didn't do much with the park. It was used by neighbors, but it was not developed until 10 years later, and about the time when we tried to pass a park bond, which failed.
Oh, it did?
Yeah.
So, and after it failed, though, I understand the park was still developed.
Well, I think that it came close enough, more yeses than nos, even though it didn't get the 2/3 necessary, that probably the council at that time thought if the majority of the people want it, we should do something, and they had the funds to do something, so they did develop Shalp Park.
Oh, we're lucky they did.
Yeah.
And now I understand that, again, in the 70s, you were mentioning 1974, that a big push came about to have more parks than just Shalp Park.
Yeah, it's almost a parallel to what happened in earlier. We had a bond election in '74. There were actually 2 issues on. One was I'm sorry, that was a different bond issue. It was an issue to buy 4 parcels, and it would have amounted to some 30 acres of land, so it was fairly ambitious. And that came pretty close to passing, close enough so that the council, of which I was one of them at that time, decided that it was a mandate. I mean, 2/3 vote for anything is a mandate, even though it doesn't meet the legal requirement. So we went ahead and we bought 2 parcels. We bought Redwood Grove, and we bought what is now Heritage Oaks. At that time it was called Mackenzie Oaks. And one of the arguments against buying those parks was that the other council people said, well, we don't have the money to develop them, so we shouldn't buy them. There's also an argument that the money that we did have really was earmarked to do some sewage treatment work. And Ruth Kohler and I were new on the council, and we didn't have all that baggage of thinking we knew what this money was to be used for. So we decided parks was the highest priority. We persuaded a 3rd council person to vote with us, and within a month of being on the council, we voted to buy the parks, and did.
That's wonderful. And I know that Redwood Grove, being one of the parks you bought, is such a wonderful nature preserve now with all of the summer camps, and certainly people must be pleased.
We made really good use of Redwood Grove. When we bought it, it was scheduled for development. That is, there was a development approved on it, and it just seemed to most people that 5 acres of, you can't really call it natural land because many of the things down there were not native plants, but certainly it was totally undeveloped and a beautiful piece. And the city's made good use of it with the kids in the summer, and as just a place for people to stroll and walk. And the only development that's been done is to build the wooden boardwalk along the creek, which is a very nice amenity. And then they used the big building down there for the nature classes. Heritage Oaks is really done in the model of Shalp Park. It's also along a creek side, so it has the natural creek side, but a lot of grassy area and some children play area and recreational area. Shalp Park really has been the model for most of the parks that followed. Redwood Grove is a one of a kind.
And along those lines, what parks have we had after the initial Shalp, Redwood Grove, and Mackenzie? What followed?
Well, I think the biggest purchase, which was also very controversial, came in around '76 or so, and that was Hillview School. The school district had surplused it as enrollments were declining, and they tried to sell it for development, but amazingly enough, no developer even bid on the property. The city bought the property, which is over 10 acres, the combined, and they bought it for around $400,000. And the idea there was to use the buildings as well as the playing fields. So we actually did some property swapping, and we ended up with a soccer field, a baseball diamond, and the buildings. And the buildings are used very intensely by organizations in town, as well as it's now the home of our recreation department. So it was very well used.
Definitely.
And what we did about the same time is we added 10 cents to the property tax. That was the days before Proposition 13, when councils could do such things without a vote of the people. And we designated that 10 cents for parks. We call it the AIM program, which was acquisition, improvement, and maintenance of parkland. So then we really had the money to improve the parks that we were buying. About the same time, we had what is Merrimead Park under lease, which were leased from the Medical Missionary Sisters. And we developed that park with those AIMS money, and then later on, 5 years or so, we actually bought that piece.
I didn't realize that, okay.
That same period of time, we made a deal with the school district to build a mini park in the back of the Covington site, put the tennis courts in, and took over management of the swimming pool. So the city now has a city swimming pool, which until that time we didn't have. So that period was just a very productive period for
Definitely.
Parkland. Yeah.
They were lucky they got you on the council at that time, I'd say.
Well, I think there was talk about recall when we started talking about buying parks. But there were, as I said, people really were concerned about whether Los Altos could afford to be a city with no industrial or business tax base. So they were very frugal, which has paid off pretty well in the long run. Mm-hmm. Another park we haven't talked about is the Mackenzie Park, not to be confused with Mackenzie Oaks, which we changed to Heritage Oaks, but the Mackenzie Park really was a byproduct of the city's need for a corporation yard, a place where maintenance vehicles could be stored. And when they got the Mackenzie property, they had enough room so that they had room to put a park. And the park is sort of shelters the corporation city, so it's not so visible from the street or to the neighbors.
So that's right there off Foothill Expressway.
Right, near Altos Oaks Road, right. And that's, the main part of that park is also in the model of Shout, but there are also a couple tennis courts in there. So it sort of combines both the Shout model and the tennis model.
Yeah, indicative of the 70s.
The 70s were a big time for tennis. Mm-hmm. I mean, among the most avid workers all that time for parks were the tennis players. Even though many of the parks didn't promise them tennis courts, they just thought that we needed more parks and we needed more tennis courts.
Now, as far as where the city's going from here with their parks, are there guidelines for cities allocating a certain amount of parkland now? Yeah,
the guidelines, national guidelines, are about 5 acres per 1,000 residents. And given our size, that would dictate we have 125 or 150 acres of parkland. When I was on the council, I think we had 10, and that's grown over the years to maybe, we probably have 50 to 60, depending upon which account, where the account history house or things like that, or the civic center. So we're still less than half of what the guidelines say we should have. In coverage, we're pretty good. We've got parks pretty much all over the city. Mm-hmm. We were deficient in South Los Altos, but in the last 3 or 4 years they acquired Grant School, which is developed now in the model of Hillview, using the school building for community organizations and the playing fields for recreation. So the distribution throughout the city is pretty good. And the problem is there isn't just much land left.
Yeah, that's a very real issue, I think, in this whole area.
Yeah.
But we're lucky we got as much as we did, I think, designated.
Well, I think we did, given the late start we got.
Do they have any place at this point that they're looking at to acquire for park?
Not actively. The school enrollment now is growing, so it's unlikely there are going to be school district surplus. In fact, the schools are probably going to come after us and want some of those schools back. Church land is a possibility, but churches again seem to be expanding, and I don't know of any church that's been thinking that they need to move. And there just aren't any other big pieces. The Jesuit property, the El Retiro Retreat, is probably the largest open space we have. We did make a deal with them at the time they developed that property that they could not develop on much of the land, so that'll be open space forever, but it's not open to public use. If the Jesuits ever decided to leave, that would be a wonderful big park, but they seem to serve a pretty important role now in the community. They have successful retreats up there, so in the 70s they were in financial difficulty, but now they seem to be sound.
And it's a beautiful view up there, so.
Yeah, it's a gorgeous place, and it does. Preserved. It's one of the few places in Los Altos that has a view.
Yeah. Well, our time has gone by too quickly, but thank you so much for being here with us this evening.
It's a pleasure. I hope we can do it again.
Sharing all this. Thank you. Roy and I are planning to visit a few of the parks we mentioned in our conversation this evening in the next couple of weeks, depending on the weather, and to share our video experience with you. We'll be adding this Los Altos Park sampler to our studio interview. Please stay with us for that. Standing here in the middle of the Redwood Grove, it's an absolutely beautiful December day, and we're standing in front of what is now the Nature Center, but Roy, it looks to me like it was probably once a house.
It was a house. The story is that you know, this whole area attracted a number of people from San Francisco that used it for a recreation area, and this probably is a good example of that. The story is that a gentleman in San Francisco asked his daughter to find him a recreation site or a second home site, and she found this wonderful 5.7 acres along Adobe Creek, which is right over there. He also told her he wanted one with redwood trees. Well, it didn't have redwood trees, but they planted redwood trees about 1919, and as you can see, there's some just gorgeous big redwood trees here that are suffering a little bit from the drought. And the house, we don't know exactly when the house was built, but he inhabited the house, and then he left the property to his daughter, and I think she lived here till 1960 or so. And I don't know exactly what happened. When the city bought the property in 1974, and the house was empty, but there's another nice house by the entrance, and there are a number of little shacks on the property, and maybe you'll see some of those later. But when the city bought the property, all those were inhabited, even though some are probably uninhabitable by younger people, and the city let them stay for a time and actually paid for relocation for some of the people. But we wanted somebody in the house by the entrance to act as sort of a caretaker, and then little by little we took over the little shacks, and there's nobody living here, though one of them is used by a potter right now, and some of them have been torn down. When we bought the property, this house was empty, so it was immediately turned into the Nature Center, though the nature programs for kids didn't start until later, 10 years I think they've been going on. So now you can't imagine the city, I can't imagine the city without this piece of property. I mean, now they have year-round programs, and you drive by the entrance, and there are always cars there with parents with their kids waiting for the instructors to show up. In this building, there's an artifact collection from the Ohlone. Florence Fava donated it to the city, so that's used in the education program. The city has put in not many improvements, just a wonderful walkway by the creek, a wooden walkway, which really adds a lot. And I don't know whether people come down here just to meditate, but it's certainly a wonderful spot for that. And I do see people walking down the drive from time to time. We don't let autos in, so it really is kind of a secluded and quiet place.
Well, Roy, I'd have to agree. It's definitely a park that's worth checking out here in Los Altos. Please come down and join us. Inside the Nature Center, like Roy said, you can see an Ohlone Indian exhibit that was collected here locally. You can also see various animals that are local to this area, and it's certainly a place, like Roy said, to come and meditate, have a picnic, take a walk. We hope to see you down here soon. Standing now along one of the wooden pathways that runs through the nature center, and it's amazing, Roy, how they managed to put this in and it doesn't take away from the aesthetic value of the park. When was this walkway put in?
I can't remember exactly when it was put in. It was after I left the council, so it's after '82. But they really did a nice job because it looks so natural. It's all wooden and fits right in and allows people to stroll around. There's no water in the creek today, but when there is water, it still allows people to stroll and really look into the creek. And the redwoods. And it's amazing how redwoods regenerate themselves. I mean, here's on our left is one growing right out of an old stump, so I guess the redwoods will be around for a long time.
It's reassuring to know that the park will keep regenerating itself.
And also, I don't know how often it will happen, but in the tradition of planting redwoods, a couple of years ago we planted a little redwood back there in honor of Denny Spangler, who was a mayor of Los Altos who passed away recently. So maybe more people will do that as well and give new meaning to some of our redwoods. You know, we were talking earlier about how nice it would be to live down in a place like this. Actually, when the city bought this piece of property, it was approved for a subdivision, so we literally snatched it out of the jaws of development for preservation. It certainly would be a wonderful environment to have a little house, but this way, many people can enjoy the unique quality of Redwood Grove.
Oh, and it definitely is wonderful down here. We're standing here in front of the Garden House in Shout Park today, and Roy, I'm interested. I know when we discussed this as a city park, I didn't remember any buildings on it. How did they come to have this building?
I don't know exactly how it happened, but there was a group of senior citizens that had raised some money. I suppose it was a social group, and they propositioned the city that they would raise the money and build the building if the city would let them put it on city land. So that's what happened. In 1965, they built this wonderful building. It has a large auditorium area, has workshops in the basement, and the city leased the building back to them at some nominal amount. They ran quite a number of social events and controlled the use of this building for years, and it was a nice example of citizen initiative and cooperation with the city. Then a few years ago they had difficulty because of their declining number. They had difficulty maintaining the building, so they actually turned the building over to the city, who now owns it and maintains it. The Garden House Associates can have events here, but so can many other groups, and many do, and the city has events here as well. And it's a nice building, and it decorates well for parties, so it's been a pleasure to have it.
That's great to hear. It actually looks like there's also another barbecue area added on to the side of the building, so it's a good place to rent out for parties.
Yeah, that came fairly recently. In the 70s, we acquired a piece of land and put that barbecue area. It has a very large barbecue, so it's appropriate for groups, and the city makes that available to groups. There've been a number of weddings there, which is kind of an interesting use. Shout Park is set back. There's a long drive, but it's behind houses, so from time to time we were able to get the backs of people's lots and add to the park. And there's a parking area over there that was added. There's another undeveloped piece that's available that the city has now, and they're talking about deciding what to do with. So Shout Park has been a growing park since the original gift by the Shoups in the 1910s or whenever they gave the property to the city.
As you can see, even on a rather chilly December morning, there are a lot of children out playing on the playground here at Shout Park, and it's good to see that our city parks are being so used by the residents.
Yeah, this park has been heavily used ever since I can remember. Any weekday, there are always kids and parents in the playground area right behind us, and mothers and fathers and grandparents, and it just was a nice place to come, and you can talk to your neighbors while the kids run around and screech and hit each other, and you're close enough so you can intervene in case they get in any trouble, but you can carry on a little social activity on your own. So that became the model. Most of our parks have little playgrounds, not quite as large as the one at Shout, which was the first park, but It's the thing that we tried to incorporate. And this park is also along Adobe Creek, and there are actually some redwoods growing along the creek bed. It has a lot of open space for you can have events. Town band plays there on Sundays during the summer. And there's some little barbecues and picnic tables along the creek here, and they're very intensely used during the summer evening meals. And in fact, people keep saying that's what we need more of. So this park formula has worked quite well. Shoup was the first, and was replicated in other parks, but it still is, I think, my favorite park. And as we say, it keeps growing a little bit.
And it is a really beautiful park. It certainly incorporates all the elements of serenity and beauty, as well as being a functional, useful park. And this is the end of our tour of the Los Altos parks, but I know there are plenty more for you to go check out, and we encourage you to do so. And we'll look forward to seeing you next time here on the History Show.